On his 18th birthday, a boy aged out of the system with nothing but a key to a derelict farm he thought was long gone. But what he found there wasn't abandonment. It was a final, desperate message. If you've ever felt lost, if you've ever felt like you were starting from a place so far behind you couldn't even see the starting line, then this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button and become part of a community that understands. The bus ride was the longest 3 hours of my life. Every mile that the groaning diesel engine put between me and the gray walls of the Eastgate group home felt like a year being shaved off a prison sentence I never knew I was serving. It was my 18th birthday. Freedom. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. For 2 years, freedom had been a distant star, a theoretical concept. Now it was just the cold vibration of the window against my forehead and the smear of gray, late autumn rain blurring the world outside. My entire worldly possessions were in a single, worn-out backpack at my feet. A change of clothes, a toothbrush, a paperback I'd read so many times the cover was gone, and $312 in cash. My final payout from the state for services rendered in the category of existing. And in the front pocket, a single, old-fashioned iron key. It was heavy, ornate, and rusted in the grooves. It felt like a relic from another century. Yesterday, my caseworker, a man named Mr. Davies, who had the perpetually tired eyes of someone who'd seen too many kids like me spit out of the system, had called me into his cramped office. It smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. He slid a thick manila envelope across his desk. "Happy birthday, Leo," he'd said, his voice flat, devoid of any real celebration. Inside was the key and a sheaf of legal documents, brittle with age. A deed. For a farm, a place I hadn't let myself think about in a decade. "I thought it was sold," I'd mumbled, my voice feeling distant, disconnected from my body. "To pay for all this." I gestured vaguely at the institution around us. Mr. Davies sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of the entire child protective system. "It was supposed to be, but there were complications, liens, unpaid taxes, title disputes. Your grandfather, Arthur, he left things in a mess. By the time the state could have legally seized it, the debt on it was more than the land was worth. It's been sitting in legal limbo for 10 years. Now, it's yours." He didn't say it was a gift. He said it like it was a burden, a final problem he was now legally obligated to hand over to me. He showed me the numbers. The back taxes were staggering, a figure that might as well have been $1 billion for all the chance I had of ever paying it. "The county will likely foreclose within the year," he added, as if delivering a weather report. "But until then, you have a roof. Technically." A roof. He made it sound like a curse. I remembered the farm in flashes, like broken pieces of a dream. The smell of hay and damp earth. The rough, calloused feel of my grandfather's hand holding mine. The vast, terrifying darkness of the country night. And then the last memory. The sharp, sterile blue and red lights of a police car painting streaks across the farmhouse walls. My grandfather's voice, low and urgent, and then a strange woman with a kind face telling me we were going on a little trip. I never saw him again. They told me he went to prison. They told me he'd done something bad. They told me he'd left me, abandoned me. For 10 years, that word had been the bedrock of my identity. Abandoned. Now I had a key to the place where it all happened. The bus hissed to a stop at a crossroads marked by a single, blinking yellow light. "Hollow Creek," the driver grunted, not even turning around. I grabbed my backpack and stepped out into the biting wind. The bus pulled away, its red taillights disappearing into the mist, leaving me in a profound and terrifying silence. The town wasn't much of a town at all, just a gas station with a convenience store attached, a boarded-up diner, and a post office. The sky was a solid sheet of granite. I was utterly, completely alone. Freedom. It felt a lot like being lost. I stood there for a long time, just letting the cold seep into my bones. The wind whipped my thin jacket against my ribs, a constant nagging reminder of how unprepared I was for any of this. The single instruction Mr. Davies had given me was that the farm was 4 miles down Old Creek Road. There were no taxis, no Ubers, no friendly faces offering a ride. There was just me, my backpack, and the long gray ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the skeletal trees. Before I started the walk, I went into the convenience store. The bell above the door gave a cheerful, out-of-place jingle. An old woman with hair like spun silver sat behind the counter, reading a newspaper. She looked up over her glasses, her expression neutral but not unkind. "Help you?" she asked. Her voice was raspy, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. I suddenly felt intensely self-conscious, like the word orphan was tattooed on my forehead. I grabbed a bottle of water, a bag of beef jerky, and a cheap plastic lighter from a display near the register. Essentials, or what I imagined essentials to be. As she rang them up, her eyes lingered on me for a moment. "You're not from around here?" It wasn't a question. "No, ma'am," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I pushed the crumpled bills across the counter. "Just passing through?" she pressed gently. I hesitated. Lying felt easier, safer. But the truth was all I had left. "No, I'm headed to the old Miller farm, Arthur Miller's place." Her hands stilled on the cash register keys. The neutrality in her eyes sharpened into something else. Pity, maybe, or just plain curiosity. "Arthur's place?" "Lord, child. No one's been out there in years. Not since, well, not for a long time." She slid my change back, her fingers brushing mine. They were surprisingly warm. "It's a long walk, and a cold one. You sure you know what you're getting into?" I just nodded, unable to form words. What could I say? That I had no other choice? That a dilapidated, debt-ridden farm was the entirety of my inheritance? That I was walking toward the very place my life had shattered, hoping to find... what? Shelter? Answers? I didn't even know. I thanked her and left, the little bell jingling my departure. The walk was brutal. The road was cracked and uneven, the shoulders overgrown with weeds. Every gust of wind felt like it was trying to peel the skin from my face. My sneakers, already worn, were no match for the 4 miles of unforgiving asphalt. My thoughts churned with every step. I tried to picture my grandfather, Arthur. The image in my head was blurry, faded by a decade of institutional living. I remembered his laugh, a deep, rumbling sound that made his whole chest shake. I remembered the smell of sawdust and coffee that always clung to his clothes. But mostly, I remembered the feeling of his absence, a hollow space that no foster parent or caseworker could ever fill. Why did he do it? Why did he leave me? The official story was assault and resisting arrest during a dispute with a neighbor. That's what they'd told me when I was old enough to ask. It never felt right. It was a story that was too small, too simple to explain the complete severing of a life. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the bruised purple sky with streaks of dirty orange. The temperature dropped with the light. My hands, shoved deep in my pockets, were numb. The key felt like a block of ice against my knuckles. Then I saw it. A break in the trees, a rusted, collapsed gate hanging off one hinge, and a faded wooden sign, half swallowed by ivy, that read, Miller Farms. A gravel driveway, more weeds than gravel, snaked away from the road and disappeared into the gloom. I took a deep breath, the cold air stinging my lungs. This was it, the start of my new life, or the end of my old one. I wasn't sure there was a difference. I turned off the road and started down the driveway, each crunch of my feet on the gravel sounding like a gunshot in the immense, heavy silence. The house was a silhouette against the dying light, a jagged shape that looked more like a ruin than a home. It was a two-story farmhouse, classic in its design, but time and neglect had been cruel. The paint was almost entirely gone, leaving the wood siding a ghostly, weathered gray. Several windows were boarded up, others were just dark, vacant eyes. A section of the porch roof had collapsed, leaving a tangle of rotten wood and shingles. The whole structure seemed to be sagging in on itself, tired of standing, ready to return to the earth. My heart sank. Mr. Davies had said it was in bad shape, but this was something else. This was a corpse, a monument to decay. The driveway ended in a muddy patch of ground in front of the house. To the left stood a large barn, its red paint faded to a dull, rusty brown. Its great doors were shut tight, but one of them hung crookedly on its track, leaving a dark, gaping space. The air was thick with the smell of wet dirt, rotting leaves, and something else. A deep, loamy scent of memory and loss. I walked up the 3 remaining porch steps, testing each one with my weight before trusting it. They groaned in protest. The front door was a solid piece of wood, scarred and faded, but it looked intact. The iron key felt heavy and cold in my trembling hand. I slid it into the lock. For a moment, it wouldn't turn, the mechanism frozen with rust and disuse. I put my shoulder into the door and twisted the key with all my strength. There was a loud, grating crack, and the lock turned. The door swung inward on a long, mournful creak, opening into a darkness that felt absolute. The air that rushed out was stale and frigid, carrying a decade of dust and stillness. I hesitated on the threshold, a primal fear crawling up my spine. This wasn't just an empty house. It was a place where a life had ended, where my life had been broken in two. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to walk away, to take my chances on the road, anywhere but here. But where would I go? Back to the town with its one store and pitying eyes? My $300 wouldn't last a week. This was it. This was all I had. I took a step inside and then another. I pulled the heavy door shut behind me, the sound echoing through the house like a final judgment. The darkness was total. I fumbled in my backpack for the cheap lighter I'd bought. My hands were shaking so badly, it took me 3 tries to get a flame. I held the tiny, flickering light aloft. It did little to push back the shadows, but it gave me a small circle of reality to cling to. I was in a living room, or what was once a living room. The furniture was still there, draped in white cloths that had turned a dingy gray with age. They looked like ghosts huddled together in the dark. A thick layer of dust covered every surface, a fine gray snow that had been falling uninterrupted for 10 years. The air was so still you could almost feel the weight of it. I could hear my own heartbeat, a frantic, thudding rhythm in my ears. I took a few steps further into the room, my light dancing across the shrouded shapes. A sofa, 2 armchairs, a large stone fireplace, its hearth black with old soot. It was a tomb. My tomb. A wave of despair, so powerful it almost knocked me off my feet, washed over me. This wasn't a home. It wasn't even a shelter. It was a final, cruel joke played on me by a grandfather who'd thrown me away, and a system that didn't care. The flame from the lighter flickered and died, plunging me back into absolute blackness. And in that moment, I broke. I slid down the wall, my back against the dusty plaster, and I cried. I cried for the little boy who was taken away from this place. I cried for the teenager who grew up in sterile rooms and indifferent care. I cried for the man I was supposed to become today, standing on the threshold of his future, only to find it was a ruin. The sobs were silent, racking my body, a grief too deep for sound. I was 18 years old. I was free, and I had never been more trapped in my entire life. I don't know how long I sat there in the dark, huddled against the wall. Time seemed to have stopped. Eventually, the tears ran out, leaving behind a hollow, aching coldness that had nothing to do with the temperature. The survival instinct, the one thing the system had managed to drill into me, finally kicked in. Crying wasn't going to make a fire. It wasn't going to find me a place to sleep. I pushed myself to my feet, my joints stiff and protesting. I got the lighter working again and began a more methodical search, not for answers, but for basic necessities. I needed to find a place to sleep that wasn't on a dusty floor, and I needed to check if this house was as dead as it felt. The living room led into a kitchen. The small flame illuminated a checkered linoleum floor, curled and cracked at the edges. The countertops were coated in the same layer of grime. I tried a faucet. A deep groaning sound came from the pipes, followed by a sputtering cough of rust-colored water that quickly slowed to a drip. So, there was water. That was something. The refrigerator door was slightly ajar. I opened it cautiously, bracing for the worst. But it was empty. Just a faint, musty smell. Someone had cleaned it out before they left. A small act of consideration in a sea of neglect. I found a box of matches in a drawer, their heads miraculously still dry. They were more reliable than the lighter. I lit one and used it to find a candle on the mantelpiece, a thick, half-melted stub left in a saucer. Its steady, warm glow was a comfort, pushing the oppressive darkness back to the corners of the room. With the candle for light, I started to explore. The house was small. Living room, kitchen, and a small bathroom downstairs. A narrow staircase led up to 2 bedrooms. I went up cautiously, the stairs creaking under my weight like the moans of a dying animal. The first bedroom was small, empty except for a bare mattress on a metal frame. My room, I guessed. The second was larger. His room. My grandfather's. The air in here felt different, thicker. The ghost of his presence was stronger. A large, sturdy wooden bed, a tall wardrobe, a nightstand, and against the far wall, a heavy oak desk. This was the heart of the house. I could feel it. I ran my hand over the dusty surface of the desk. My fingers left clean trails in the grime. This was where he must have sat, managing the farm, paying the bills, living his life before it all came crashing down. I started opening the drawers, not expecting to find much. The top ones were empty, save for some dried-up pens and paper clips. But the bottom right drawer was locked. I jiggled the handle, but it was solid. Frustrated, I was about to give up when my fingers brushed against something taped to the underside of the desk's knee hole. It was a small key. With trembling hands, I fit it into the lock of the drawer. It turned smoothly. I pulled the drawer open. Inside, there were only two things. A heavy gray metal box, the kind people use for cash or important papers. It was locked with a small built-in combination lock. And lying on top of it was a single sealed envelope of thick, cream-colored paper. My name was written on the front in a familiar, slightly shaky cursive. For Leo, on his 18th birthday. My breath caught in my throat. His handwriting. I hadn't seen it in 10 years, but it was as clear in my memory as his face was not. I picked up the envelope. It was heavy, substantial. My heart was hammering against my ribs. This was a message from the past, from a ghost. I sat down in the dusty chair in front of the desk, the candle flame dancing and casting long, flickering shadows on the walls. For a moment, I just held the envelope, a strange mix of fear and a desperate, painful hope rising in my chest. What if it was a confession, an apology? What if it was just a final, cruel goodbye? I had to know. I carefully broke the wax seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The paper was thick and smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. The letter began without preamble, the words stark and clear in the flickering candlelight. Leo, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have come home. I am sorry. Those are the first words I need to say. I am sorry for the years you spent without me, for the silence, for the story you were told. It was a lie, all of it. I had to stop and take a breath, my eyes blurring. The directness of it was a physical blow. He wasn't apologizing for what he did, but for what I had endured. The letter continued. I never abandoned you, son. I sent you away. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, but I had to protect you. There are bad people in this world, Leo. People who are greedy and ruthless, and they wanted this land. Not for the soil, but for what's under it. A company, Pioneer Holdings, they knew there was something valuable here. I had it confirmed. They made me an offer, a ridiculously low one. I told them to go to hell. This farm has been in our family for 100 years. It's not just dirt to be sold off to the highest bidder. My hands were shaking, making the paper tremble. This wasn't the story of a simple assault. This was something bigger, something darker. They don't take no for an answer. They tried threats. They tried intimidation. When none of that worked, they set me up. The fight with our neighbor, old Mr. Henderson, they paid him to start it. They had men waiting. It was a trap designed to get me arrested, to get me out of the way so they could seize the property for the back taxes they knew I couldn't pay from a prison cell. I had a choice. I could fight them in court, a long, ugly battle that would put you in danger, or I could take the deal they offered. Plead guilty to a lesser charge, do my time, and in exchange, they would leave you alone. They promised not to touch you. I chose you, Leo. I always chose you. A single tear dripped from my chin and landed on the page, smearing the ink. It was all unraveling, a decade of carefully constructed narrative about my own unworthiness, my own abandonment, turning to dust. He hadn't left me. He had sacrificed himself for me. The anger I had held on to for so long, the bitter resentment that had been my constant companion, it just dissolved. It left a vast, aching emptiness in its place. Grief. For him. For us. For the years we'd lost. The letter wasn't finished. I don't have much time. They're coming for me. Everything you need to understand is on this farm. The proof of what they did, the truth of what this land is worth. It's all here. But you have to be smart. You have to be careful. They may still be watching. In the metal box is the start. The key to that box is hidden. Remember our favorite book, the one about the sea captain? Courage is grace under pressure. Find the book. Find the key. The rest is up to you. Be safe, son. Know that I loved you. I love you still. The letter ended there. Arthur. I sat in the silence of the cold, dark room, the words echoing in my head. The sea captain. It was Moby Dick. He used to read it to me. He'd do the voices, his deep baritone booming as he read about Ahab and the great white whale. I looked around the room. There was no bookshelf. My heart sank. Of course. 10 years. Things would have been moved, sold, thrown away. But then my eyes fell on the wardrobe. I pulled open its heavy doors. It was filled with his old clothes, still hanging there, smelling of mothballs and cedar. And on the floor, tucked away in the back corner, was a small wooden crate. I pulled it out. It was full of books. And there, on top, was a heavy leather-bound copy of Moby Dick. My hands trembled as I opened it. Tucked inside a hollowed-out section of the pages was another small iron key. The key to the metal box. A wave of triumph and love for this man I barely remembered washed over me. He had planned this. He had left me a map, a trail of breadcrumbs through time. As I stood up, clutching the book and the key, a movement outside the window caught my eye. I looked out into the pitch-black night, toward the hulking shape of the barn, and my blood ran cold. A light was on. A single, steady, pale yellow light, glowing from a high window in the barn. It cut through the darkness like a watchful eye. It was impossible. The power was off. The place had been abandoned for a decade. But the light was there. It was undeniably, terrifyingly there. My first thought was that they were here. Pioneer Holdings. The bad people my grandfather had written about. Maybe they'd been watching the farm all this time. Maybe they had an outpost in the barn. The thought sent a jolt of pure, undiluted terror through me. I dropped to the floor, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would break through. I scrambled backward, away from the window, and pressed myself into the corner of the room, making myself as small as possible. The candle I'd left on the desk guttered, casting my frantic, oversized shadow against the wall. I held my breath, listening. The only sound was the frantic drumming of my own pulse in my ears, and the old house groaning around me in the wind. No footsteps, no voices, no sound of a vehicle. Just the oppressive, heavy silence of the countryside and that single, impossible light. I stayed there for what felt like hours, cramped in the corner, my muscles screaming in protest. The fear was a physical thing, a cold, heavy weight in my gut. Every creak of the floorboards, every rattle of a window pane in its frame, was a sign of imminent discovery. My mind raced, replaying the words in my grandfather's letter. They may still be watching. Was this a warning, or had I already sprung the trap? I thought about the metal box and the key clutched in my hand. What was in it? Was it worth dying for? The idea of running, of just grabbing my backpack and disappearing back into the night, was a powerful, seductive siren song. I could be gone. I could sell the key and the box to a pawn shop, take the few $100s I had, and just vanish. Start over somewhere new, somewhere they wouldn't look for me. It would be easy. It would be safe. But then I thought of my grandfather. I thought of his sacrifice. 10 years in a prison cell. 10 years of his life traded for mine. He had trusted me. He had believed that on my 18th birthday, I would be strong enough, smart enough, to come home and finish what he started. He had left me a legacy, not of land and money, but of a fight. Running away would be a betrayal of everything he had done for me. It would mean that his sacrifice was for nothing. It would mean letting them win. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but something else was growing alongside it, a slow burning anger, a flicker of resolve. This was my home. They had taken my childhood. They had taken my grandfather. I wasn't going to let them take this too. I had to know what was in that barn. I had to know what was in that box. Sometime before dawn, the candle burned out, plunging the room back into darkness. I didn't light another. I just sat there, watching the window, watching the light. It never flickered. It never moved. It just shone with a steady, unwavering glow. And then, as the first hint of gray began to lighten the eastern sky, it went out. Just like that. It winked out of existence, leaving the barn a dark, hulking shape once more. The sudden absence of the light was almost as unsettling as its appearance. I stayed put until the sun was fully up, painting the dusty room in pale, watery light. The world outside looked ordinary, peaceful. The trees dripped with morning dew. The overgrown fields were just fields. It was hard to believe the terror I'd felt just a few hours before. But the memory was real. The light had been real. Slowly, cautiously, I got to my feet. I went to the window and looked out. The barn stood silent, its crooked door like a grimace. There were no tire tracks in the mud that weren't my own. No footprints. No sign that anyone had been there at all. I had to make a choice. And in the cold light of day, the choice I'd made in the dark still held. I wasn't running. I was staying. I was going to open that box. And then I was going to find out what was in that barn. First, the box. I sat at the old oak desk, the morning light streaming through the dirty window pane, illuminating the swirling dust motes in the air. The gray metal box sat in front of me, solid and impassive. I took the small key I'd found in the book and inserted it into the lock. It clicked open. I lifted the lid. Inside, my grandfather's neat, practical nature was on full display. There was a thick, waterproof pouch, and inside it a bundle of cash. I counted it quickly. $50 bills held together by a rubber band. $5,000. To me, it was a fortune. It was survival. It was enough to buy food, supplies, maybe even put a down payment on the back taxes to keep the county at bay for a little while. Beneath the money was another sealed envelope, this one thicker than the first. And under that, a set of rolled-up papers tied with a piece of twine. They looked like maps. I opened the second letter first. The handwriting was the same, but this one was longer, more detailed. "Leo," it began. "If you found this, you found my book. Good lad. That $5,000 is all the cash I could hide. Don't be a fool with it. It's not for fancy things. It's a tool. Use it to buy yourself time. Food, warm clothes, a generator if you can find one. Pay a little on the taxes, just enough to show intent. Don't let them take this place for pennies on the dollar." He was so practical, even in a letter from beyond the grave. It made me smile, a sad, tight curve of my lips. Now, about the barn. If you saw a light, don't be afraid. That was me, or a part of me I left behind. I knew the power would be cut. I knew this place would be dark. I couldn't stand the thought of you arriving to nothing but darkness. So I rigged something up. Years ago, I buried a deep-cycle marine battery, connected it to a small solar panel hidden on the south-facing roof of the barn. It's set on a timer, Leo, a simple 24-hour timer I built myself. It was set to turn on for 1 hour on the evening of your 18th birthday. A signal, to let you know that the things I put in place are still working, to let you know you're not alone. Relief washed over me so intensely my knees felt weak. It wasn't them. It was him. A light he'd left burning for me across a decade of darkness. A beacon. A welcome home. I had to put the letter down for a moment and close my eyes. The image of my grandfather tinkering with wires and a battery, planning for a future he would never see, for a boy he hoped would one day return, was almost too much to bear. When I could see clearly again, I picked up the letter. The real fight starts now, son. The maps I left you are the key. Pioneer Holdings wants this land because of a rare earth mineral deposit that runs in a vein right under the north pasture. It's worth millions. I have the original geological survey, the core samples, the proof. But I couldn't keep it in the house. Too risky. I hid it, on the property. The maps are marked. They won't make sense to anyone else, but they will to you. They mark places that were important to us. The old oak where we built the treehouse. The spot by the creek where you caught your first fish. The foundation of the old smokehouse. Go to these places. You'll find what you need. This is your choice, Leo. The 5,000 is yours. You can take it and walk away. No one would blame you. Build a new life for yourself, far away from here. Or you can stay. You can find the proof and you can fight them. You can clear my name and save our home. It's a hard road, but I believe you can walk it. The letter ended with one final sentence. The choice is yours. Your life is finally your own. Make it one you can be proud of. I put the letter down. The choice. He had given me an out, a clean break. But looking around the dusty room, at the ghost of a life that was stolen from us, I knew there was no real choice at all. Walking away wasn't an option. Not anymore. I unrolled the maps. There were 3 of them. One was a hand-drawn map of the farm itself, with little X's marking the spots he'd mentioned in the letter. The other 2 were property surveys, covered in lines and numbers I didn't understand. But I didn't need to. I had my grandfather's map. I had my mission. I bundled up the cash and the papers, hiding them deep inside my backpack. It was time to go to work. But first, the barn. I needed to see it. I needed to stand in the place where his light had shone for me. I walked out of the house and across the muddy yard. The barn was even bigger up close. A silent, sleeping giant. The crooked door was heavy, but I managed to shove it open wide enough to slip through. The inside was vast and cavernous, smelling of hay and dust and animals long gone. Shafts of light cut through the gaps in the siding, illuminating the dancing dust in the air. And there, high up in the rafters, I saw it. A single glass jar lamp with a wire running from it, disappearing into the roof. His beacon, my welcome home. The $5,000 felt like a shield against the world. The next morning, I walked the 4 miles back into town, my backpack feeling significantly lighter without the weight of desperation in it. My first stop was the post office, where I bought a money order for $500 and mailed it to the county tax office. It was a pittance against the total debt, but as my grandfather had advised, it was a gesture. It was me planting a flag. My next stop was the general store. The old woman, whose name I learned was Martha, was behind the counter again. She watched me as I methodically filled a shopping cart with practical, long-lasting supplies. Canned goods, rice, beans, coffee, work gloves, thick socks, a heavy-duty flashlight, and a dozen candles. "Looks like you're planning on staying a while," she said, her voice holding that same gentle curiosity. "Yes, ma'am," I replied, feeling a bit more confident than I had 2 days ago. "I'm going to try and fix the place up." She nodded slowly, her eyes appraising me. "It's a lot of work for one person. Arthur, he was a strong man, but that farm, it took everything he had." She paused, then leaned forward slightly. "Your grandfather was a good man, you know. Whatever they said he did, a lot of folks around here never believed it. It didn't track. He was stubborn as a mule, but he wasn't a violent man." Her words were a balm on a wound I didn't even know was still so raw. To hear someone, a stranger, defend his character after a decade of official condemnation, it meant more than she could ever know. I paid for my supplies, and as I was about to leave, she said, "If you need anything, you let me know. And you tell Silas to mind his own business if he comes snooping." "Silas?" I asked. "Silas Croft, your neighbor to the west. Grumpy old coot, but his heart's in the right place, mostly. He keeps an eye on things." The walk back with a backpack full of heavy cans was even harder than the first time, but every step felt meaningful. I was investing in my future. I was building something. When I got back to the farm, there was an old, beat-up pickup truck parked in the yard. A tall, wiry man in his late 60s, with a face like a road map and a stained baseball cap, was standing on my porch, peering in a window. Silas, I presumed. He turned as I approached, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "You the one squatting here?" he grunted, his voice a low rumble. "It's my property," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "My name is Leo Miller. Arthur was my grandfather." His expression softened, but only slightly. The suspicion was replaced by a look of grim assessment. "Humph, Miller, huh? You got his eyes." He looked me up and down. "Heard in town you were here. Thought I'd see for myself. Place is a wreck." "I know," I said. "I'm going to fix it." Silas spat a stream of tobacco juice into the weeds. "Gonna take more than elbow grease, kid. The roof is shot. Foundation's got cracks. This ain't a weekend project." "It's all I've got," I said simply. He was quiet for a long moment, just staring at the house, then at me. "Arthur was a friend of mine," he said finally, his voice softer. "He got a raw deal. He kicked at a loose porch step with the toe of his boot. This step's a death trap. I got some spare lumber in my barn. I'll bring it by tomorrow. You got a hammer?" I shook my head. He sighed, a long, suffering sound. "Figured. I'll bring a hammer." He turned and walked back to his truck without another word. He got in, started the engine with a roar, and drove away, leaving me standing in the yard with my groceries. It wasn't exactly a warm welcome, but it was something. It was a connection. The first thread in a web of community I hadn't realized I was so desperate for. That night, a call came. My cheap burner phone, a relic from my last few months in the system, buzzed against the wooden table. The number was blocked. I answered hesitantly. "Leo Miller?" The voice was smooth, professional. "Yes?" "My name is Harrison Cole. I'm a representative for Pioneer Holdings. I understand you've recently taken possession of your grandfather's property." The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Pioneer Holdings. They were real, and they had found me. "How did you get this number?" I asked, my voice tight. "We have our ways," he said dismissively. "Listen, son, I'll get right to the point. The property is in a state of extreme disrepair and carries a significant tax burden. We are prepared to make you a cash offer, as is, to take it off your hands. We'll pay you $50,000 and forgive the entirety of the back taxes. It's a generous offer, more than fair. It's enough for a young man like you to get a fresh start somewhere. $50,000. It was a staggering amount of money, life-changing money, 10 times what I had in my backpack. But I knew what my grandfather had said. It was a pittance, a lowball offer for land worth millions. "I'm not interested," I said, my voice colder than I expected. There was a pause on the other end of the line. The smoothness in his voice was replaced by a sharp, threatening edge. "I think you should reconsider, Mr. Miller. That land holds a lot of unhappy memories. It might be best for everyone if you just walked away. Think about it. I'll call you back in a few days." The line went dead. I stood in the silent kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear. The threat was clear. The fight had just become very, very real. The phone call lit a fire under me. The threat, veiled as it was, made everything more urgent. They knew I was here. They were watching. I had to find the proof my grandfather had hidden, and I had to find it fast. The next morning, I started with the first X on the hand-drawn map. The old oak. I remembered it instantly. A massive, ancient tree on a small hill overlooking the west pasture. We'd had a rope swing there. I spent a whole summer trying to get high enough to see over the treetops. I found the tree easily. It was even bigger than I remembered. A gnarled, patient giant. The rope swing was long gone, but a few feet of frayed rope still hung from a thick branch, a ghost of childhood laughter. The X on the map was right at the base of the trunk, on the north side. I got down on my hands and knees in the damp leaves and started searching. My grandfather was a clever man. He wouldn't have just buried something, he would have hidden it. I felt around the base of the trunk, running my hands over the rough bark and the exposed roots that snaked into the earth. My fingers found it. A loose piece of bark. It was cut so cleanly it was almost invisible. I pried it off with my fingertips. Behind it was a hollow space, and tucked inside was a small oilskin pouch. My heart hammered in my chest. I opened it. Inside was a key, a modern one, not an old iron key, and a small folded piece of paper. The note was simple. Safety Deposit Box, Hollow Creek Savings and Loan, Box 113. That was it. He'd had an off-site stash. Of course he did. He wouldn't have kept everything on the farm. That afternoon, Silas came back as promised. He had a stack of weathered but solid-looking lumber in the bed of his truck, and he carried a heavy toolbox onto the porch. He didn't say much. He just got to work, tearing out the rotten steps with a crowbar and measuring the new planks. I stood there, awkwardly watching him. "You gonna stand there like a lawn ornament, or you gonna help?" he grunted, not looking up. I spent the next 2 hours as his apprentice, handing him tools, holding boards steady while he sawed, and learning the difference between a Phillips and a flathead screwdriver. He worked with a quiet, efficient competence that I admired. When we were done, the porch had a set of sturdy, safe, new steps. "There," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "That'll hold." "Thank you, Silas," I said, my voice filled with genuine gratitude. I don't know how to repay you." He just grunted. "Pay me back by not letting this place fall down. Your granddad loved this farm." He looked me in the eye. He'd be proud of you, sticking it out. The simple, unadorned praise hit me harder than any threat. It was a validation I hadn't realized I was starving for. He left soon after, and I turned my attention to the next spot on the map, the creek. The spot where I'd caught my first fish was a small, shaded bend in the creek that ran along the southern edge of the property. I remembered that day. My grandfather had shown me how to bait a hook, how to cast the line. I'd caught a tiny sunfish, no bigger than my hand, and he'd treated it like I'd landed a marlin. I found the spot easily. A large, flat rock jutted out over the water. It was the rock we'd sat on. The X was on the rock itself. I searched its surface, but there was nothing. No loose stones, no hidden compartments. I was about to give up when I remembered something my grandfather used to say. Sometimes you have to look at things from a different angle, Leo. I waded into the freezing cold water of the creek and looked at the underside of the rock. And there it was. Bolted to the bottom of the rock, just above the waterline, was a small waterproof pelican case. It was green, covered in algae, but it was intact. It took me 20 minutes of wrestling with the rusty bolts in the icy water, my fingers going completely numb, but I finally got it free. I carried it back to the house, shivering, and set it on the kitchen table. I snapped open the latches. Inside, nestled in foam, were two things: a thick binder full of plastic-sleeved pages and a small handheld tape recorder. I opened the binder. It was the Geological Survey. Page after page of technical data, charts, maps, and chemical analyses. I didn't understand most of it, but the summary on the first page was clear. Significant deposit of high-grade neodymium located. Neodymium, a rare earth mineral, crucial for making powerful magnets, used in everything from cell phones to electric cars. This was it. This was the proof of the land's value. Then I picked up the tape recorder. It was an old micro-cassette recorder. I pressed the play button. A familiar hiss filled the room, and then a voice. His voice. Not from a letter, not from a memory, but real, tangible, filling the space around me. Test, test. Is this thing on? Ah, good. The voice was older than I remembered, rougher, but it was him. It was Arthur. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this was his final message. This was the one he had saved for last. I sat at the kitchen table, the last rays of the afternoon sun slanting through the window, and I listened. Leo, my grandfather's voice crackled from the tiny speaker. If you're hearing this, it means you found it all. It means you didn't run. I knew you wouldn't. You have your grandmother's heart, stubborn, loyal. His voice was warm, filled with a love that transcended time and the tinny quality of the recording. He sounded so close, like he was right there in the room with me. I'm not going to waste time telling you what you already know from the letters. You know about Pioneer. You know what they did. What I want to tell you now is why. Why this farm matters so much. There was a pause, the sound of him taking a breath. This land isn't just a piece of property, son. It's a story. Our story. Your great-great-grandfather bought this land with his army pension after the First World War. He cleared it with his own 2 hands. He and your great-great-grandmother built this house from trees they felled right here on this property. They survived the Depression on this land. They raised a family here. Your grandmother was born in the upstairs bedroom, the one that was mine. She grew up here. She met me at a dance in town, and after we were married, we came back here. We raised your father in this house. We buried him in the churchyard down the road after the accident. We loved, we grieved, we lived on this land. Every board in this house, every fence post, every stone in that fireplace, it's soaked in our history, in your history. I closed my eyes, picturing it. Generations of my family, their lives intertwined with this soil. I wasn't just an orphan spat out of the system. I was the end of a long line. I had roots right here, under this floor. When Pioneer came sniffing around, his voice continued, a hard edge of anger creeping in. They didn't see any of that. They saw dollar signs. They saw an obstacle. They offered to buy me out, to erase 100 years of our family's life for a check. I told them what they could do with their offer. This place was never for sale. It was always for you. I was just the caretaker. I opened the binder with the geologist's report again, looking at the cold, hard data. Millions of dollars, buried right under my feet. And he had turned it down. He had chosen the story over the money. I know I've put a heavy burden on you, he said, his voice softening again. I'm giving you a fight that isn't yours. That's why I gave you the out, the money, the chance to walk away. If you take it, I will never blame you. You hear me, Leo? Your life is your own. You owe me nothing. You survived. That's all I ever wanted for you. But if you choose to stay, if you choose to fight, you won't be fighting for a piece of dirt. You'll be fighting for us, for our name, for the idea that some things, some places, are more than just their monetary value. They're a part of who we are. The tape hissed for a few seconds, and then he spoke one last time, his voice thick with emotion. This farm isn't just dirt and wood, son. It's our story. It's your home, if you choose it. I love you, Leo. Be brave. The tape clicked off. The silence that followed was immense. I sat there for a long time as the room grew dark, the tape recorder clutched in my hand, and I cried. Not the desperate, hopeless sobs of that first night. These were different tears. They were tears of grief for the man I never got to know. Tears of gratitude for the love he had so carefully preserved for me. Tears of anger for the injustice he had suffered. And tears of resolve. He had asked me to choose. He had given me permission to leave. But he had also given me a reason to stay. A reason so powerful, so profound, it settled in my very soul. He had given me a home. Not just a roof and walls, but a place to belong. A story to be a part of. The next morning, I called the only person I could think of who might be able to help. Mr. Davies. I told him everything. I told him about the letters, the hidden cash, the threats from Pioneer Holdings, the geological survey. I expected him to be skeptical, to tell me I was in over my head, but he listened patiently. And when I was done, there was a long silence on the line. Leo, he said finally, and his voice had lost its usual tired flatness. It was sharp, focused. Don't talk to anyone else. Don't answer any calls from Pioneer. I'm going to make a call. There's a lawyer I know, an old friend who works with the Innocence Project. She specializes in cases like this. Wrongful convictions, corporate malfeasance. This is right up her alley. Can you get to the city? I think so, I stammered. Good. Stay put for now. I'll call you back with a plan. The choice was made. I wasn't running. I was fighting back. The story doesn't end with a dramatic courtroom victory, not right away. Life is messier than that. The wheels of justice, I learned, turn infuriatingly slowly. Mr. Davies was true to his word. He connected me with a lawyer named Sarah Chen, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who seemed to run on coffee and a fierce sense of indignation. I took a bus to the city and met her in her small, cluttered office. I laid everything out on her desk, the letters, the geological survey, the safety deposit box key, the tape recorder. She examined it all with a forensic intensity, her expression growing grimmer with each page she turned. When I played my grandfather's final message for her, she took off her glasses and rubbed her eyes. "They buried him," she said, her voice quiet but vibrating with anger. "They buried this man to get at a mineral deposit." The legal battle she initiated was a slow, grinding war of attrition. Pioneer Holdings had a team of high-priced lawyers who threw up every roadblock imaginable. They filed motions to dismiss. They questioned the authenticity of the documents. They painted my grandfather as a disgruntled criminal and me as a delusional opportunist. But Sarah was relentless. She filed counter motions. She hired her own experts to verify the geological survey. She tracked down old Mr. Henderson, the neighbor from the original fight, who, riddled with guilt and in poor health, finally gave a sworn deposition about how Pioneer had paid him to provoke my grandfather. The safety deposit box, when we finally got a court order to open it, contained the final pieces of the puzzle. Notarized copies of every document, and a signed affidavit from a former Pioneer employee who had been fired for refusing to participate in the frame-up. My grandfather had built an airtight case and hidden the pieces for me to find. While the lawyers fought, I went back to the farm and I worked. Silas became a fixture in my life. He showed me how to patch the roof, how to reglaze the windows, how to coax the ancient tractor in the barn back to life. He never asked for anything in return. "Keeping my arms from seizing up," he'd grumble. But I knew it was more than that. He was helping me guard my grandfather's legacy. Martha from the general store would save me day-old bread and bruised vegetables. "No sense in it going to waste," she'd say, pressing a bag into my hands. The community, which had at first seen me as an outsider, a stray, slowly began to embrace me. They were quiet, reserved country folk, but they showed their support in small ways. A wave from a passing truck, a shared pot of coffee, an offer of help when I was trying to wrestle a fallen tree off a fence line. They remembered Arthur. They were on his side, and now they were on mine. I used the rest of the $5,000 to survive. I learned how to be frugal, how to repair things instead of replacing them. I planted a small garden in the spring, using seeds Silas gave me. I wasn't just occupying the farm anymore. I was becoming a part of it. I was putting down roots. The big break in the case came almost a year after I first arrived. The local newspaper got wind of the story and ran a front-page article. "Local farmer framed by corporation for land rights. Grandson fights to clear his name." The story exploded. The state attorney general's office launched an official investigation into Pioneer Holdings. Their stock price plummeted. Suddenly, their high-priced lawyers were a lot more interested in settling. They offered me money, a lot of money, 7 figures, enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life and never have to worry about a leaky roof again. Sarah laid the offer out for me. "It's a good offer, Leo," she said. "It's a win." But it wasn't the win I wanted. The offer required a non-disclosure agreement. It required that the full story of what they did to my grandfather never become public record. They wanted to buy my silence. They wanted to erase the story. I thought about my grandfather's voice on that tape. "You won't be fighting for a piece of dirt. You'll be fighting for us, for our name." I told Sarah to refuse the offer. We were going to court. I wanted his name cleared. I wanted the truth on the record. I wanted justice, not a payoff. The final phase of this journey is still being written. The court date is set for this fall, but something fundamental has already changed. The farm is no longer a ruin. It's a work in progress. The house has a sound roof and clear windows. The fields are no longer choked with weeds. There's life here again, and I'm no longer the lost, angry kid who stepped off that bus a year ago. I am Leo Miller. I am Arthur Miller's grandson. This is my home, and I am here to stay. Home isn't a place you're given. I learned that the hard way. It's a place you fight for. It's a place you build, not just with lumber and nails, but with love and memory and purpose. If my story taught me anything, it's that you can rebuild from the ruins, that the most valuable inheritance isn't money or property, but a story worth fighting for, and the choice to live a life you can be proud of. If you're facing your own ruins, if you're fighting your own battles, don't give up. The fight is what makes us who we are. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, subscribe to this channel, because we're a community of people who get it. We understand that sometimes the hardest roads lead to the most beautiful destinations. Share your story in the comments below. Tell us what you're fighting for. We're listening, and we're here for you.